Charlie, you have been a long-time admirer of Singapore and Lee Kuan Yew. You once said that study the life and work of Lee Kuan Yew, you are going to be flabbergasted. I would be curious to know, how did you start your interest about Singapore and Lee Kuan Yew, and have you met Lee Kuan Yew in person, and if there is one thing the world could learn from Singapore now, what would that be?
Well, Lee Kuan Yew had the best record as a nation builder. If you're willing to count small nations in the group, he had probably the best record that ever existed in the history of the world. He took over a malarial swamp with no army, no nothing. And pretty soon, he turned that into this gloriously prosperous place. And his method for doing it was so simple. The mantra he said over and over again was very simple. He said, figure out what works and do it. Now, it sounds like anybody would know that made sense, but most people don't do that. They don't work that hard at figuring out what works and what doesn't, and they don't just keep everlastingly at it the way he did. And again, he was a very smart man, and he had a lot of good ideas, and absolutely took over a malarial swamp and turned it into modern Singapore in his own lifetime. It was absolutely incredible. And he did not have, it was a one-party system, but he could always be removed by the electorate. He was not a dictator. And he was just so good. He was death on corruption, which was a very good idea. And in fact, there's hardly anything he touched he didn't improve. When I look at modern Singapore health system, it costs 20% of what the American system costs. And of course, it works way better than our medical system. And that's entirely due to the practical talent of Lee Kuan Yew. Just time after time, he would choose the right system. In Singapore, you get a savings account the day you're born. And if you don't spend the money, you and your heirs get to spend it eventually. In other words, it is your money. So to some extent, everybody buying medical service in Singapore is paying for it himself. And of course, people behave more sensibly when they're spending their own money. He just, time after time, he would do something like that recognized reality and worked way better than what other people were doing. And there aren't that many people like Lee Kuan Yew that have ever lived. Of course, I admire him. I have a bust of Lee Kuan Yew in my house. I admire him that much.